Welcome to Rosie Arnold from Prairie and to the International Center in Indianapolis. We're here to talk about Rosie's invitation to go to Russia and speak there after meeting with a group of IVLP visitors from Russia in December. So Rosie, can you tell us a little more about your meeting with them in December and kind of what you're expecting to do when you go to Russia in a couple of weeks?
Sure. So when the group came to Prairie in December, our park is seasonally based as far as we offer different experiences throughout the year. And in December, we were having our holiday school programs on the day that the group was planning to come. So we showed the group our Gingerbread Jamboree school program, which is adorable. It's made for pre-K through grade 1, and with that program we use the story of the gingerbread man to take the students on a little journey where they get to hear, or first they travel out to one of our historic buildings. It's an 1823 brick 2-story building. It's sort of the centerpiece of our grounds here. It's the William Connor House, so our namesake. And so they go out to the house and they sit and listen to the gingerbread man story, and then they go into the kitchen of the house where they meet a farmer's wife character. And she's making a giant gingerbread cookie, and so she shows the students, and they get to smell and touch all the different ingredients that are involved in making gingerbread cookies. And in that kitchen, we have a very large beehive oven. It's about 4.5 feet deep, and so she says that she's making one giant gingerbread cookie, and she opens the oven up to show the students her cookie, and it seems that he has disappeared. So he's run away. And so the students then go on a little quest throughout our grounds. They go to one of our animal barns, and they meet a sheep and some goats and the cow and just whatever critters happen to be in the barn that day. And so they ask them if they've seen the gingerbread cookie, and of course they haven't. So we have tracks laid out to get the students back into the main Welcome Center building here at Prairie, and so they go hunting for the gingerbread man, and then they catch him. Ultimately, it's one of our staff or volunteers who's wearing a suit, but it's the giant gingerbread man that they meet, and then they do a little singing and dancing with him, and then they get to go to another room and eat a gingerbread cookie that they can decorate. So it's a really, really charming program, very cute, and the Russians seem to enjoy it quite a bit. So when we were finished with that, I showed them around a little bit of the rest of the grounds because we weren't actually open for anything other than school programs that day. But we also talked about, or we spent some time indoors as well, talking about mostly just Prairie's philosophy towards interpretation and towards education programming. We very much believe in the power of interactivity and hands-on learning, definitely making experiences that are engaging and that get students involved with their own learning. So we just talked a lot about that, and our approach to interpretation is called opening doors. And so we talked about what's involved in that sort of style of interpretation, and just some of the different ways that we try to engage our guests.
That's great. That sounds like a really cute interactive program that gets kids excited about what you have to offer there. So can you tell us a little bit about how the consulate in Russia approached you and what they asked you and what your goals are for your trip over there?
Yeah, it was quite a surprise because I think Beth's probably mentioned that I've hosted a few groups here at Prairie before, and everyone is always very nice, and everyone always says, "You're welcome in our country anytime you want to come," and you always say, "Oh, yeah, sure, great," and never expect that it would actually happen. But then a while back, I got an email from one of the folks at the U.S. consulate in St. Petersburg, and he said that when this group of Russian Museum professionals came back to St. Petersburg, in their debriefing, that they really enjoyed their time at Prairie, and they really enjoyed talking with me, and they wanted to know if it would be possible for me to travel there to meet with them at their museums and meet with their staff at their different respective places. And so most of the ones that I'm going to are open-air museums like Conner Prairie. And I've done a little bit of investigation on them as well, as much as I can with Russian websites. Not speaking Russian, but they seem very much like looking at traditional Russian culture, looking at different folkways and things like that, much the same way that we do here at Conner Prairie. They do seem a little more traditional as far as their presentation style, so that'll be interesting to see how the two compare. But I think that's part of why they want me to travel there as well, is just to get my ideas on ways they might be able to be more interactive and be a little more engaging to particularly their young guests. In the write-up that we sent to get the trip approved by the State Department, basically, they were talking a lot about how Russians are very proud of their culture, and there's a lot of history there as far as being very strong in education and wanting to have very strong museums, but that young people especially are not engaging with museums in the way that older generations have. And so they want to find ways to be more appealing to young generations, much in the same way I think that a lot of American museums have had or have done. It's not a unique struggle, and I think that just Conner Prairie has had a really great approach to that and had a lot of success in that arena. So I'm excited to see what ideas I might be able to share with them.
That's great. I'm so excited that you're going to be able to get to do that.
Rosie, going back to how Conner Prairie is known for having such an interactive experience and that opening doors policy you have, do you want to talk a little bit more about that and how you plan to maybe showcase that in Russia on your trip?
So the way I understand it right now is that they want it to be more informal discussion with the staff. They're not planning on having me do a lot of formal presentations. I'm going to be prepared to be able to do that if the plan should change at the last minute. But right now, I think what they would like me to do is tour their sites and see some of their programming in action, and then come back and have a conversation about it. So I think that's more of the way that it's going to go. But the whole philosophy behind our opening doors approach is to put each guest, and that's what we call our visitors here. We don't call them visitors on a regular basis. We call them guests because we know that they're choosing to come to us. They're choosing to spend their leisure dollars and their leisure time with us. So in being really respectful of that, we do everything we can to make them feel welcome and at ease and like they can be successful here. And so we really put their interests at the focus of all of our interactions. We're not traditional in that we a lot of living history museums that you'll go to, there will be a person there in their costume doing their activity, and they will just talk to you about the activity, whereas here we let you get involved in that activity. But if that activity isn't what you're into, we'll find something else to talk to you about.
Okay, so we're going to hopefully just edit that out.
Okay.
So you had touched on earlier that you were going to meet with some of the visitors at some of their museums, the people that you met in December when you're in Russia. Are their museums a similar focus to Conner Prairie, or do they focus on different pieces or collections?
So from what I understand of the ones that, the list that I've been given, the itinerary, there are a few different focus areas, but a lot of them still have that element of sort of living history. They're all kind of around that same idea. So the first one that I'll be visiting is in Izborsk, and that is a fortress. It's an old fortress town that is over 1,000 years old. So that alone makes me kind of excited to go see it. And then they have two museums on the itinerary that are what they call ethnographic museums. So those are representations of cultural groups within Russia. So with one of them, it's actually even later in time than what we do at Conner Prairie. We have a few different historic areas, but the ones we're best known for are 1836 and 1863. The last one that I'll be visiting, Semenkovo is, I believe, what it's called. But that one is actually focused on the late 1800s, so the late 19th century. So it's even later in time than what we are. There's another one, I believe, that's a little bit closer to our time that we represent, and that one, I believe, is in Novgorod. So there are a few different ones, and they're looking at both time, but then also at an individual culture that they represent. But several of them are part of what they call museum reserves, and so that means that they've got the living history component, but then they also have, for example, an art museum. One of them has an art museum associated with it. Another one has a natural history museum associated with it. The one in Novgorod, I believe it's the one in Novgorod, has a lace museum that is attached to it. So there are these museum complexes, more or less, and the living history is just a part of that.
Sounds like a very interesting structure.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited to learn about it. It's different from here.
Yes, very. So while the group from Russia was here in Indiana, did you notice any assumptions maybe they had about museum management and culture in the U.S. that you maybe had to field or navigate? We're just curious about that exchange.
Yeah, a little bit. And actually, I've gotten this from several of the groups that I've hosted. The idea of an independent museum that's not state associated at all, because we're completely independent here. That was a different sort of idea to several of them. So being completely free from, we don't have to please the government here is basically the idea, because that's not where our money comes from. It's not where our support, for the most part, comes from. We get a little bit, but not very much. So being able to make those choices as far as representation and how we represent things was an interesting concept to several of them. And with that comes funding of, where does our money come from? Those sorts of questions were pretty common.
Yeah, that's great. It's a cool exchange of information and policy and the way to do things, especially.
You mentioned earlier that attracting the younger generation is a common theme both in Russia and for museums in the U.S. Do you think Americans and Russians have similar views on preserving cultural heritage? Are there similar challenges that museums may face, or do you think there's a larger gap in just the basic way we look at that issue?
As far as a cultural difference, I think I'll be able to answer that question better when I get back. But I'm not sure, honestly. It's one of those things that I'll be interested to see when I go over there. I mean, certainly there is a generation gap in terms of technology and level of interactivity that different groups are used to. So I think that is almost more where that's more what I was perceiving while they were here. Is that just people my age and younger expect a certain level of interactivity that older generations may not have. So that I understand that part of it at this point, but as far as cultural differences, I will know more after I come home.
Great, you're setting us up for another conversation.
So Rosie, we know that you've had the opportunity to host several international groups or delegations through this program. Do you have any thoughts or takeaways on maybe the value of an international exchange program, even before you've gone on a trip yourself? How do you feel on the hosting side of things?
Yeah, well, the reason I was first really interested in doing this when Beth first called me a few years ago was honestly, it was because I had started to travel internationally a little bit when I was in college and then just after, and I hadn't gotten to do it for a while, and I really missed being able to talk and interact with people of different cultures. because I personally just find a lot of value in that of making the world small. And so I sort of thought, well, if I can't travel right now, they can travel to me, and I'll get to meet them that way. And we have this common thing that we do, so there's that immediate middle ground right there. So that immediate place of comfort a little bit. So I think any time that you can be somewhere else and see another part of the world is a good thing. You know, expanding your perspectives and understanding a little bit more where other people are coming from is always good. And I know a lot of people that have never traveled outside of the United States, and I just feel like the way I see the world is a lot different than the way that they do. And I just think the perspective that you have when you've done that is just incredibly valuable.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think you're in good company, both with MCID and the National Center.
Absolutely.
This was always kind of a secret hope, but it was sort of a secret hope, but it was like I never really expected that to happen. But
you are proof that dreams come true.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us, and I hope you have a wonderful trip, and I hope we get to talk to you when you get back, too. I want to hear all about it.
Yeah, definitely, and I'll try to get our tech bugs worked out in the meantime.
Thank you, Rosie, so much.
Thank you, Rosie, and I owe you some